Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Ned Hallowell, your host of the podcast Distraction. We're going to have a few words about dyslexia today, and it's a condition I know very well because I have it myself. In first grade, it was noted that I was a very, very slow reader. I was having real trouble learning how to read, and other kids were picking it up just as easily as pie. But I couldn't get phonics readily. And so they told my mother and father that I was a mirror reader. And that was a shorthand term for what's now called dyslexia. It was also called strephosymbolia and lots of long terms. But the notion of a mirror reader essentially meaning you read as if you were reading something in a mirror, which is also not accurate. But a shorthand definition of dyslexia is that you are a slow reader. You're slow to learn to read and spell your native language. And to this day, I'm a painfully slow reader. It takes me forever to get through a book. My wife says she doesn't know how I know anything. I read so slowly. But I did major in English at Harvard College and graduated with high honors while doing pre-med. So I had to be able to read, at least haltingly, in order to do that. And that's typical of folks with dyslexia. We tend to have hidden talents. We tend to, embedded in the dyslexia, so-called disability, are tremendous talents. And thankfully, that's getting more and more press these days. We're not seeing either dyslexia or ADHD as entirely as disabilities because they're not. It's not a PR campaign. It's a truth campaign. And the truth is, with dyslexia as well as ADHD, there are special positive qualities embedded in it. They're gifts that are hard to unwrap, is how I often put it. I tell folks I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap gifts that can be very hard to unwrap. And along those lines, a few weeks ago, I was able to speak with media mogul Alan Meckler, who has done some amazing things in his career, in spite of, or I might add, because of, his dyslexia. I think we could agree, we could say in spite of and because of his dyslexia, because of the kind of brain he has, which does include dyslexia. He's an internet pioneer and the former chairman and CEO of Mediabistro Incorporated. Also the founder and chairman of Meckler Media Corporation. Well, let's go to my conversation with Mr. Alan Meckler right now. I'm probably best known, to the extent people know of me, for my work with learning differences. I have both ADHD as well as dyslexia, and I understand you have one of those conditions?
I didn't know I did.
Yeah.
I found out about it in a roundabout way. A freelance writer was writing an article for the New York Times, and it was had to do with baseball, and I was a lifelong Yankee fan. And this fellow was going to write an article in the New York Times magazine section. He was going to follow 4 people for several weeks during the summer, go to baseball games with them, get their memories, and here in New York. So he had asked me how I got interested in baseball, and I said I couldn't specifically remember, but I do remember that when I was about 6 or 7 years old or 8 years old, I couldn't read, and I was going to be left back. I think it was in the first grade or second grade. And I got interested in baseball, and I taught myself to read because I wanted to follow all the sports coverage of the New York Yankees. So I taught myself to read.
How did you do that?
I told him about this, and that story got rejected. But then the Times had him write a story about successful people who had dyslexia in business, and he went and interviewed this Dr. Shaywitz up at Yale.
Right.
And she was talking about various forms, and he said, wow, I met this fellow on another assignment. He must be dyslexic. So he described my experience about the baseball and all. She said, clearly, for his age, he obviously had dyslexia, but nobody knew it.
Uh-huh.
The next thing I know, she wanted me to spend a few hours with her. We did a lot of that on the phone, and I guess that's how I was diagnosed.
And how old were you at the time?
It was about 15 years ago.
Uh-huh. Well, that's wonderful. Well, it's a nice...
I mean, it explained a lot of things for me.
Yeah.
From the frustrations I had in school and life.
And those frustrations were related to reading?
It wasn't just reading. I had problems with math. I could do simple arithmetic most brilliantly, but I couldn't do algebra. I couldn't do geometry. I just couldn't do anything like that. Mm-hmm. In fact, I never passed algebra. I couldn't do word problems, and I had very low college boards.
Did you graduate from college?
Yes, I did. But what happens when you're, of course, by hindsight, when you're dyslexic, is you learn which fork in the road to take in terms of courses and things. You intuitively knew after a while that you shouldn't get involved in certain types of classes. Right. I remember I was going to college, and I took a psychology class thinking it would be something I could do. And I took the first test, and I could never do multiple choice. I'd get all bollocksed up in my mind. Uh-huh. And then when I found out that the whole course was multiple choice, you could always drop a course, and I did. So I had to really pick my spots. Mm-hmm. Anything that I could memorize was fine, but multiple choice got me all confused because I would start playing the different options out, and I invariably picked the wrong answer.
Mm-hmm. What would you say your strengths are?
Memorization. Uh-huh. I'm very good at memorizing, and
you must be good at more than that, though.
I've been very good at being able to pick out important tidbits. People are talking or lectures or whatever. I could always zero in on the salient point. I think this, and I was very good. I'm very good at spotting, I think, strategic trends and other things, and that's why I did well in business. I sort of could project out when I heard about something, whether it be good or bad, in the fields I was in. And I think that, if anything, that's my greatest skill. There was a book written, it was a bestseller about 10, 12 years ago called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Yes. And, if I have any claim to fame, he cites that in the 20th century, I can't remember how, I think there were just 2 or 3 black swan events. One of them was the Internet, and I clearly, not that I've gotten significant recognition, but I was clearly one of the only 2 or 3 first people in the world to recognize the commercial side to the Internet.
Wow. And you got a PhD in history with dyslexia.
Yes, in history at Columbia University.
Wow. I have dyslexia, and I was an English major at Harvard. So, we both have been able to do good things in spite of dyslexia. And I often say because of dyslexia, because I think there's a very positive side that doesn't get recognized often. It's certainly true in your case. Do you also have ADHD or not?
I don't think I necessarily. My parents sent me to boarding school in the 9th grade because I would get, as I remember, like 2 A's and 3 D's, or whatever. And I think what it was is that I couldn't do anything other than I could only do well in things that I could memorize, and you can't memorize algebra, things like that.
Right.
So I think that as a defense mechanism, I seem not to be able to focus. But I think what it was is once I knew there was something wrong, that I couldn't do something, so I would react in a negative way in the class or whatever.
I often say the real learning disabilities are fear and shame and believing you're stupid. And some people just can't learn foreign languages, and they're forced to try anyway. And it's
right.
It's really not a smart thing to do. Well, you're a wonderfully interesting man, and I thank you for taking time out of your busy day to have this conversation with us.
Well, thank you for the interest. Always nice to chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Meckler.
Okay, nice chatting with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, please leave us a review on iTunes. We haven't been getting as many reviews of late, and that's probably because we haven't reminded you to do it. So please do it. It helps us a lot. Let me remind you that Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Our producer is Sarah Gurton. Our sound engineer is Scott Person, and our music theme was created by Mark Berman.
Hey, it's Sarah Gerton, producer of Distraction, here to remind you to check out our sister podcast, Just the Right Book with Roxanne Cody. Now in its second season, Just the Right Book will help you discover new books, hear interviews with your favorite authors, and keep you up to date with the literary world. Recently released is a 2-part conversation with Mark Salter, John McCain's longtime writing partner, aide, and friend, who recently co-authored Senator McCain's final memoir, The Restless Wave. Just the Right Book podcast is free to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, just like Distraction. And you can even listen to the podcast on your smart speaker at home. We hope you check it out. Thanks.